I am Lukas Miller, 25 years old, born and raised in Munich, Germany. My father was a meticulous mechanic, his hands always stained with grease, yet gentle when he repaired our old bicycle or taught me the basics of engines. My mother, a schoolteacher, instilled in me a love for numbers and the quiet discipline of learning. Our home was modest, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the distant hum of trams on the streets outside. It was a life of order, routine, and warmth, a life I would soon realize I could not hold on to. My younger brother Emil was only 20. He carried the light of youth in his eyes, ever curious and brimming with energy. Where I was cautious, Emil was daring. Where I measured every step, he leapt ahead with hope and enthusiasm. Despite the 2-year gap, we were inseparable. We built model airplanes together, read the same books under the dim glow of the kitchen lamp, and whispered dreams of traveling the world. Yet, as the clouds of war gathered over Europe, our bond became tinged with fear and uncertainty. News from the front lines seeped through newspapers and whispered conversations in the streets. Though we could not yet grasp the full scope of what was to come, we knew life as we had known it was about to change forever. In the quiet moments before the storm, we clung to each other and to letters, small threads that promised to carry our voices across the divide, whatever it might bring. Our childhood was a tapestry of small, vivid moments. Every morning, the aroma of fresh bread would drift from the kitchen as mother prepared breakfast, while father tinkered with old engines in the corner, his hands moving with practiced precision. Emil and I would sit side by side at the worn wooden table, sharing toast and dreams alike, laughing at the simplest jokes, building miniature airplanes from balsa wood or sketching maps of imaginary lands we swore we would one day explore. Together. Evenings were our sanctuary. Father would recount stories of invention and resilience, showing us how gears and pistons worked in harmony, a subtle lesson that everything in life required balance. Mother, with her calm voice and patient guidance, nurtured our curiosity, reading aloud poems and science tales, coaxing us to question, to imagine. We often raced to finish chores only to find ourselves sprawled on the floor with a half-finished puzzle, teasing each other about who was faster or smarter. Yet beneath the laughter, a quiet awareness of the world's unease was always present. The whispers of neighbors, the distant rumble of political unrest, and the headlines in the morning papers hinted at a storm approaching. Emil, ever sensitive, would pause mid-laughter, his eyes reflecting unease. I did not yet fully understand. I would grasp his shoulder, reminding him that we had each other, that together we could weather anything. These memories, warm, ordinary, precious, became our anchor. As tensions rose and the shadow of war crept closer, it was these shared moments, the laughter, the gentle scoldings from Mother-Father's patient guidance, and Emil's unwavering spirit that reminded me of what we were fighting to preserve: family love and the fragile peace of ordinary life. The streets of Munich had always carried the rhythm of ordinary life trams, clattering market vendors, calling out children, chasing one another in the squares. Yet beneath this familiar hum, a tension had begun to thicken like the clouds before a storm. Political rallies marched through the city, their flags and chants echoing off the stone buildings, stirring both pride and unease among the citizens. Posters plastered on walls proclaimed duty, loyalty, and sacrifice, while whispers in cafes spoke of mobilization and impending conflict. Across the border in Alsace, where Emil lived, the mood was equally fraught. The region had long been a crossroads of cultures, and its people were caught between loyalties. Families whispered warnings, guards patrolled the streets more frequently, and rumors of occupation circulated like wildfire. Even simple errands felt charged. Each glance over the shoulder carried the weight of uncertainty. For us, the tension was personal. Father's hands, once steady and relaxed, now clenched tighter around the tools he worked with, and Mother's usually calm voice carried an undercurrent of worry. Emil would read the papers aloud to me during our letters, highlighting the advance of troops, the edicts of governments, the stories of battles already igniting elsewhere. I listened, heart pounding, trying to reconcile the warmth of our home with the growing shadow looming beyond it. It was in this uneasy prelude that we felt the first true stirrings of destiny, knowing life would soon demand choices we were not yet ready to make. Duty, honor, fear, and survival were no longer abstract ideas discussed in classrooms or cafes. They were about to become the defining forces of our existence, shaping the paths my brother and I would tread, even as they threatened to tear us apart. The first letter arrived on a rainy morning, its envelope creased from hurried hands. Emil had written it in his neat looping script words carrying both courage and unease. Brother, it began. The winds of change are blowing faster than we imagined. I do not yet know what awaits us, but I hope this letter reaches you safely and that you keep your spirit strong. Remember our dreams, our laughter. These are the treasures no war can steal. I held the letter close, tracing his handwriting as if it could anchor me against the tide of uncertainty. Soon after, my own reply was folded and sent with care, carrying assurances I hope will steady him. Emil, whatever comes, know that I will think of you each day. Keep safe and do not let fear rule your choices. We may be separated by borders and battles, but our bond is stronger than any army. Yet, even as we exchanged these small tokens of connection, the reality pressed closer. Orders for mobilization arrived, the streets grew lined with soldiers and checkpoints, and the once lively cafes were now hushed with anxious conversations. Father's eyes, usually so full of quiet patience, now mirrored the apprehension he dared not voice, while Mother whispered prayers under her breath each night. These letters became lifelines, bridges across the invisible chasm forming between us. They carried the weight of our shared past and the uncertainty of the days ahead. We wrote not only of our fears, but of hopes of the ordinary joys we feared would vanish, the warmth of our home, the smell of Mother's bread, the laughter that had defined our youth. Even as the shadow of war stretched longer with each passing day, these letters promised a thread of connection, a fragile reminder that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together, even if on opposite sides of a devastating divide. As I recall those days now, the memory of Emil's letters and our shared laughter lingers like a fragile light against encroaching darkness. Each sentence, each carefully folded page was more than words. They were reminders of who we were before the world demanded we become something else entirely. The weight of what was to come pressed on us, yet in those small gestures, in that fragile correspondence, we found courage. I invite you to imagine the tension of a quiet Munich morning, the distant rumble of boots on cobblestones, the flutter of newspapers detailing battles in lands far from our home. Picture a boy reading a letter in a dimly lit room, clinging to the warmth of family and the hope that life could endure even amidst the gathering storm. These were the moments that shaped us, moments of innocence balanced against the inevitability of conflict. Little did Emil and I know the threads of our childhood and the bond of our letters would be tested beyond imagination. The choices we were about to make would define not only our survival, but the very essence of our brotherhood. And so as the sun rose on our final days of peace, we held on to those ordinary moments, the games, the stories, the quiet comforts of home, unknowing that tomorrow the world would demand more than we had ever faced. This is where our story begins, at the edge of certainty and fear, with hearts tethered by family and words on the cusp of a war that would stretch across borders and test everything we thought we knew about loyalty, love, and courage. The day I received the enlistment, noticed a strange mix of pride and dread settled in my chest. Father's hands trembled slightly as he handed me the official papers, though he tried to mask it with a stern expression. Mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Emil clutched my sleeve, whispering, "Promise me you'll be careful, Lukas. Don't forget us." The train ride to the training camp in northern Germany was a blur of landscapes, towns I would never return to, and the hum of countless conversations between young men whose lives, like mine, were about to change irrevocably. Upon arrival, the camp was a world of regimented order, rows of barracks, drill grounds, and the harsh bark of officers that cut through the crisp morning air. We were stripped of individuality, our clothes and hair regulated, our names replaced by numbers and ranks. Each day began before dawn with the whistle's shrill call, and every moment was measured, every action scrutinized. Running laps, memorizing formations, handling rifles with precision, and enduring endless drills became the rhythm of my life. Yet beneath the discipline, my thoughts often wandered to Emil. I carried a small notebook, scribbling letters in stolen moments, folding them carefully and hoping they would reach him. In those letters, I recounted the monotony of drills, the camaraderie with fellow recruits, and the quiet fear that lingered in the night when the barracks were still. I told him about Sergeant Weber, whose booming voice seemed to pierce the soul, and the long hours we spent learning tactics that were as unforgiving as the war itself. Despite the rigidity, I discovered something unexpected: resilience. My body grew stronger, my mind sharper, and the fear that once felt insurmountable became a measured caution. I began to understand the mechanics of strategy, the discipline required to survive, and the camaraderie that formed among men bound together by circumstance. Still, the letters I sent to Emil were my lifeline. They carried memories of home, the warmth of our family, and the hope that even as the world tore itself apart, our bond would endure. Every stroke of the pen was a quiet rebellion against the uncertainty looming ahead, a reminder that I was not just a soldier, but a brother, a son, and a keeper of promises made in the peaceful days that now felt impossibly distant. I remember the night I officially joined the resistance as though it were yesterday. The moon hung low over the quiet streets of Alsace, casting silver light on cobblestones that had witnessed centuries of history. Our meeting point was a small cellar beneath an abandoned bakery, the air thick with the scent of damp flour and earth. Men and women of all ages moved with purpose, their faces shadowed but determined. Here I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Training was unlike anything Lukas experienced in his orderly barracks. We learned to move silently, to communicate without words, and to read the landscape as one would read a book. Every creaking floorboard, every flicker of candlelight could betray us. I learned to hide weapons in false compartments, to pass messages folded within mundane objects, and to trust instincts over orders. Nights were long and sleep came sparingly, often interrupted by drills or whispered alerts. My first real mission was simple in description but monumental in practice: deliver a packet of intelligence to a safe house 2 villages over. The journey through fields and forests was tense. Every shadow seemed alive, every distant noise a potential threat. I felt the weight of responsibility pressing against my chest. One wrong move could end not only my life but those of my comrades. Yet with each step, I reminded myself of why I was here: to protect my community, to resist oppression, and in a quiet corner of my heart, to honor the brother I could not yet see. In the stolen moments between missions, I wrote to Lukas. My letters were a mixture of reassurance and truth, conveying the thrill and terror of each operation while keeping him close despite the distance. Brother, one letter read, "I walk in shadows to keep others safe, and I think of you with every step. May these words reach you and remind you that we are still connected, no matter the lines drawn by war." These letters became my anchor, a bridge to a life that once felt normal, and a reminder of the bond that war could never sever. Though my body ached from the constant vigilance and my mind strained under the weight of secrecy, I felt alive in a new way. Every choice, every risk was mine to make. Unlike the rigid drills of a formal army here, I learned adaptability, quick thinking, and the resilience of a people determined to survive. Emil, the young man who once raced through sunlit streets with his brother, was now tempered by shadows and necessity, carrying hope like a fragile torch through nights that seemed endless. As Lukas marched in formation across the drill grounds, I could almost picture him standing rigid, the crisp lines of his uniform reflecting the precision and discipline instilled by his officers. Every command he obeyed, every movement measured and scrutinized, was part of a system designed to produce efficiency and obedience. Yet beneath the uniform, I imagined the same heart that had laughed with me in our childhood, now quietly questioning orders and longing for the familiar warmth of home. My own path in the resistance could not have been more different. Nights were alive with uncertainty, each step potentially betraying our presence to the enemy. I relied on instincts, stealth, and improvisation. Unlike Lukas, there was no officer to tell me what to do. Every choice, every risk was mine to make. The thrill of freedom came hand in hand with the weight of responsibility. Protecting civilians, delivering messages, avoiding detection, it was a delicate dance between life and death. Though our experiences diverged sharply, our motivations intertwined. Lukas fought as a soldier because duty demanded it, and perhaps because survival left little room for hesitation. I fought to safeguard those who could not defend themselves, to preserve the spirit of our community, and in the quietest corners of my heart, to honor the brother I might someday see again. War had drawn invisible lines between us, but our principles, however differently expressed, remained rooted in a shared sense of loyalty, courage, and love. Our first letters became lifelines, bridges between the worlds we now inhabited. Lukas's handwriting was precise, almost methodical, reflecting the discipline of camp life. "Emil, the days here are long and structured, each moment measured by commands and drills. I think of you constantly, wondering how you navigate these uncertain nights. Stay safe, little brother, and remember the laughter we shared. It will guide you through the shadows." In return, my letters were more fragmented, hurried, and filled with tension. Brother, I moved through streets cloaked in darkness, carrying messages that could cost lives if discovered. Yet I think of you with every step. These letters are all I have to hold on to the past and to remind me of why I fight. We poured our fears, hopes, and memories into these pages. They were not merely words, they were oaths, promises that our bond could endure, even as war sought to divide us. Each envelope sealed with wax and hope became a testament to our resilience, a reminder that family could persist across borders, uniforms, and battle lines. Through these exchanges, we began to understand the true cost of conflict, not only the danger to life, but the toll it took on hearts, trust, and the fragile threads that held us together. And yet, in every letter, a glimmer of hope persisted, the unspoken belief that one day somehow we might meet again beyond the reach of war. The world outside our personal struggles pressed relentlessly upon us. In 1940, Germany's advance into France was swift and brutal. Reports filtered through both the official channels in Munich and the clandestine networks in Alsace. Towns captured communications, severed civilians, displaced. In Munich, the propaganda machine painted the invasion as a necessary measure for national survival, while in Alsace, whispers of occupation and resistance circulated like fragile flames, risking detection at every turn. For Lukas, the weight of historical forces manifested in the rigid structures of military life. Drill sergeants reminded us daily that the Reich depended on our precision, obedience, and courage. Every formation, every march, and every rifle exercise became a lesson in understanding the machinery of war in which individuals were components to be molded and deployed. The language of duty was ever present: loyalty, sacrifice, and discipline. Meanwhile, my world was a mosaic of secrecy and urgency. Every mission, every courier run was embedded within a landscape transforming under occupation. Roads once familiar became dangerous, allies could vanish overnight, and the threat of betrayal lingered like a shadow behind every corner. The historical currents of the war were not abstract. They touched my life in real, tangible ways. The lines of soldiers in the distance, the sudden curfews, the whispered orders of local leaders. History was no longer a subject studied in books. It was a living, breathing force shaping every heartbeat and step I took. As we settled into our respective roles, the weight of moral ambiguity pressed heavily upon us. Lukas wrestled with obedience versus conscience. The drills and orders of his superiors trained him to move as a unit, to follow commands unquestioningly. Yet every act against civilians, every story of hardship he heard from townsfolk gnawed at him. Could duty justify suffering inflicted upon the innocent? I, too, felt the strain. Operating in the shadows of the resistance demanded improvisation, courage, and stealth. I saved lives, yet every decision carried consequences. Should I risk exposure to protect a small village or remain silent to ensure the safety of my unit? Each choice tested the principles instilled in me by our parents: the value of human life, the importance of empathy, and the unbreakable bond of family. Letters between us became a mirror for these inner conflicts. Lukas wrote of fear disguised as resolve. I wrote of tension disguised as strategy. In sharing our thoughts, we kept each other grounded, preserving the humanity that war threatened to erode. Our correspondence was a moral compass, a reminder that even when separated by borders, ideology, and circumstance, our shared values could endure. By the end of those first months, the world we knew was gone. Lukas had transformed from a civilian boy to a disciplined soldier, understanding the demands and structure of military life, yet carrying private doubts about the righteousness of orders. I had become a shadow in the night, a young man balancing survival duty and conscience, navigating a war that spared neither courage nor innocence. The letters, now worn and filled with crossed-out sentences and hurried annotations, had become more than communication. They were a lifeline. Through them, we sustained not only our bond, but our sense of self. Every line preserved our shared history, our values, and the flickering hope that this storm would not permanently sever the connection between us. As the first missions and deployments concluded, the reality of combat loomed ever closer. Soon, the separation between us would become more than geographical. The lines drawn by ideology, nationality, and circumstance threatened to place us on opposing sides of the same battlefield. Yet, in our hearts, the essence of our brotherhood remained intact, quietly defiant, preparing us for the trials that awaited in the violent crucible of war. The stage was set. The world had demanded that we grow, adapt, and confront the unimaginable. And in that crucible, the seeds of courage, fear, loyalty, and resilience were planted, seeds that would bear fruit in the most harrowing chapters to come. The day of the first battle arrived like a storm breaking over a fragile world. Lukas stood at the edge of a shattered town, the morning mist mingling with smoke from burning rooftops. The ground beneath him was churned to mud, scarred by artillery and littered with debris that once belonged to ordinary lives. Orders barked by officers barely registered over the cacophony of distant shelling and the sharp crack of rifle fire. Fear coiled in Lukas's stomach, but he straightened his back, forcing each step to follow the rhythm of discipline. Meanwhile, Emil navigated the narrow alleys of a neighboring village, the shadows hiding him from patrols while he guided frightened families to safety. Each footstep was careful, deliberate, every glance over his shoulder a test of nerves. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and fear, the cries of children echoing off stone walls. His heart pounded with both adrenaline and dread. One mistake could cost lives both of innocents and his fellow resistance members. In the chaos, Lukas witnessed friends fall, the young men who had laughed with him during training now, sprawled in the mud, faces etched with shock and pain. He felt the familiar grip of helplessness, but training and duty compelled him forward. Between bursts of fire, he found a quiet moment to scribble a letter, hoping it would reach Emil. Brother, the world is not as we imagined. The fear is heavy, but I think of you. Stay safe. Remember our dreams, they must survive this madness. Emil too stole moments to write. In the dim light of a hidden cellar, he pressed pen to paper. Lukas, I led a family to safety today, yet saw friends fall around me. I think of you every second. May these words remind you that we are not alone, even when the world collapses around us. The battle raged on each moment, stretching like hours, each decision carrying consequences heavier than any training had prepared them for. Smoke stung eyes, mud sucked at boots, and the cries of the wounded were a relentless reminder that war was no abstraction. Lukas and Emil were connected only by the fragile lines of ink on paper, their shared memory of childhood sustaining them through the first brush with the brutal reality of combat. By the day's end, both brothers were exhausted, covered in grime, hearts heavy with grief and fear. Yet, beneath the weight of despair, a stubborn ember of hope persisted, the knowledge that even amidst the chaos, their bond endured, carried in letters and memories, a lifeline through the storm. The aftermath of the first battle weighed heavier than any drill or night of clandestine operations. Lukas stood over the fallen body of his closest friend in the regiment, a boy named Dieter, who had shared laughter and confidences only weeks before. Blood soaked the mud around him, and the acrid scent of gunpowder mingled with the metallic tang of fear and grief. Lukas's hand shook not from fatigue, but from the raw, unfiltered reality of death. Orders demanded that he move forward, continue the mission, but the rigid discipline felt hollow against the pounding grief in his chest. Across the fractured countryside, Emil's path intersected with sorrow of another kind. He had guided a small family to temporary safety when a sudden strafing by enemy forces tore through the village, killing a young boy he had promised to protect. Emil dropped to his knees in the wet grass, the cries of his fellow villagers echoing in his ears, and for the first time felt the helplessness he had long feared. Every skill he had honed in stealth and survival seemed inadequate in the face of raw, senseless loss. Letters became urgent lifelines. Lukas wrote hurriedly in the dim light of a makeshift shelter. Emil, today I watched a friend fall. I still move, still follow orders, but part of me refuses to believe it. Keep your courage, brother. Remember the light of our home. It is what keeps me breathing through this nightmare. Emil responded with equal urgency, ink smudged from trembling fingers. Lukas, I failed to save them. I saw death too close, too real. But I think of you, and the memory of our childhood gives me strength. We must endure, if only to honor those we lost. In these moments, grief intertwined with responsibility. Each brother faced the harrowing duality of survival and conscience, the need to act decisively to save others while grappling with the emotional toll of inevitable failure. Lukas, trained to obey, struggled with the morality of orders that led to loss. Emil, acting independently, questioned every decision that resulted in harm despite his best intentions. The weight of death and the pain of absence forced a profound transformation. Their letters were no longer simple reminders of connection. They became confessions, outlets for guilt, and anchors for sanity amidst the chaos. Each shared grief reinforced their bond even as war threatened to sever everything else. Amidst smoke, mud, and blood, the brothers began to understand the first bitter truth of combat, that loss was inevitable, and only the resilience of heart and memory could keep them tethered to humanity. In the nights following the battle, Lukas could not sleep. The echo of Dieter's last scream haunted him, a relentless reminder that obedience did not absolve conscience. Every order he followed, every strategy executed with precision now felt heavy with unintended consequences. Was duty worth the cost of innocent lives? Each image of destruction, each wounded civilian gnawed at the principles instilled in him by his parents. He remembered their lessons on empathy and justice and wondered how they would reconcile the boy he once was with the soldier he had become. Emil too wrestled with his own moral turbulence. The freedom of choice in the resistance carried a cruel weight. Every decision bore the potential for life or death. He questioned whether the risks he took to save one family might doom another. Each mission forced him to navigate shades of gray, balancing the preservation of human life against the relentless advance of the enemy. For the first time, he understood that courage was inseparable from fear, and that leadership meant bearing responsibility for consequences that could never be fully controlled. Their letters became vessels for confession and counsel. Lukas wrote Emil, "I obey orders, but my heart rebels against them. I do not know if I am doing right or merely following the shadow of command. Still, I cling to the memory of home and to the hope that one day we can stand together again, free from this madness." Emil's reply carried the tension of immediacy and uncertainty. "Lukas, every choice is a knife's edge. I save some, yet cannot save all. I fear that each success comes at the cost of another suffering. We are forced to live with the decisions others cannot understand. Yet I think of you and it steadies me. The bond we share is my compass." Through these exchanges, both brothers confronted the bitter truth of their new reality. War demanded not only physical endurance but moral resilience. They were forced to navigate a labyrinth of duty, loyalty, and conscience, each path fraught with potential tragedy. The struggle within them mirrored the chaos surrounding them, a world where clear lines between right and wrong dissolved into a haze of survival strategy and heartache. By acknowledging the conflict within Lukas and Emil began to reconcile their identities as soldiers and as men grappling with the moral cost of their actions while holding on to the fragile hope that their humanity and their bond might endure beyond the battlefield. The dawn had barely broken when chaos erupted. Lukas and his unit were moving through a narrow valley, the mist still clinging to the jagged rocks, when an ambush shattered the fragile quiet. Artillery fire tore through the morning, sending dirt, stones, and screams into the air. The world became a blur of smoke, mud, and sudden death. Lukas felt the shockwave of a nearby shell knock him to the ground, ears ringing, vision hazy, yet instinct propelled him forward. Every decision was immediate and unforgiving: where to take cover, which wounded to assist, how to survive another second. Far to the west, Emil faced a parallel nightmare. Leading villagers through a forest path, they were caught in a surprise strafing. Trees splintered around them and screams pierced the night like knives. Adrenaline surged and Emil's instincts kicked in. He guided the frightened civilians, dragging the injured to safety while suppressing the fear clawing at his chest. Every choice balanced risk against necessity, the lives of innocents dependent on his judgment. Both brothers' worlds apart felt the same primal intensity, the pulse of survival mixed with terror, the awareness that a single misstep could be fatal. Lukas clutched his rifle with trembling hands, every command from his sergeant now colored with a new gravity. Emil, moving silently through the underbrush, could hear the distant rumble of gunfire echoing through the valleys, a reminder that danger was omnipresent and certainty, a luxury they could no longer afford. In stolen moments, both took to their notebooks, scrawling letters in haste. Lukas wrote Emil, "The valley became a nightmare of fire and blood. I survived, but many did not. Keep your courage, brother. Remember that each breath we take is a gift amidst the ruin." Emil responded, "Lukas, I led them through darkness and fear. Some survived, some did not. I feel the weight of every choice pressing on my chest. We are shadows in this war, yet I think of you constantly. Your words guide me." The ambush left more than physical scars. Mud-soaked, bruised, and exhausted, both brothers realized that survival demanded more than skill or courage. It required judgment under pressure, resilience in the face of fear, and an unwavering connection to the memory of home and family. In these moments of sheer chaos, the letters became anchors, tethering them to sanity and to each other even as the world around them collapsed. By the time the sun dipped low on the horizon, Lukas could no longer view the battlefield as a series of objectives or positions. Each mangled building, each smoldering heap of rubble told a story of lives torn apart. Soldiers and civilians alike were casualties of a conflict that seemed indifferent to morality or valor. Lucas's hands were stained not only with mud, but with the bitter recognition that orders, discipline, and duty could not shield one from the moral consequences of war. He had followed commands meticulously, yet still felt the weight of every life lost under his watch. Emil too found his ideals tested. The resistance had promised purpose and protection, yet the reality was far crueler. Civilians he had saved yesterday were threatened again today. Neighbors who once seemed safe were now victims of sudden violence. The bright lines between right and wrong blurred. Each decision carried unintended consequences, and Emil realized that heroism was as much about survival and judgment as it was about courage. The children, the elderly, the innocent, each face haunted him a stark reminder that war consumed more than just soldiers. Their letters began to reflect these shifting perceptions. Lukas wrote, "Emil, the world is not a battlefield of right and wrong. It is chaos, pain, and fleeting mercy. I do not know if obedience makes me honorable or complicit. I only know that each life weighs on my conscience." Emil's reply mirrored the same revelation. "Brother, we cannot save everyone, and yet we must try." The lines of morality are drawn not by flags or commands, but by the choices we make in the moment. I fear what this war is turning us into, yet your letters remind me of who I am beyond it. Through the relentless exposure to death and destruction, both brothers began to see the larger truth war was not merely a contest of armies, but a test of humanity. They learned that survival demanded not only physical skill, but also moral awareness, compassion, and a capacity to reconcile the impossible with the necessary. Lucas's disciplined obedience met Emil's adaptive cunning, yet both recognized that the essence of being human, empathy, loyalty, and remembrance must endure if they were to survive both the battlefield and the weight of their own conscience. By confronting the brutality of combat directly, Lukas and Emil's perspectives shifted. No longer were they simply soldier and resistance fighter, they became witnesses to the full spectrum of human resilience and suffering, bound together by letters, memory, and the unspoken understanding that survival carried a cost far greater than physical injury. The battlefield revealed its cruel truth in unrelenting ways. Lukas crouched behind shattered walls as shell fire rattled the streets, each explosion a violent punctuation to the rhythm of his fear. Mud clung to his uniform, soaked with rain and blood, and every step forward carried the weight of lost comrades and civilians alike. He realized with a pang that twisted his stomach that no amount of training could prepare him for the unpredictability, the chaos, and the relentless cruelty of war. Emil moved through the woods with equal intensity shadows as his allies and the cries of those he sought to protect as a constant reminder of the stakes. Each choice, when to run, whom to shield, where to hide, was immediate and irreversible. The pressure of responsibility pressed against his chest like a physical weight. He could not falter, yet every misstep threatened lives beyond his own. Letters became fleeting lifelines, scribbled in stolen moments amid the turmoil. Lukas wrote, "Emil, today, I watch men I trained with fall before my eyes. The fear is unyielding, yet I fight. Not for glory, not for orders, but for the memory of home and for you." Emil's reply was equally raw. "Lukas, I guided villagers through gunfire, and yet I felt powerless. Each breath, each heartbeat is a battle, yet thinking of you keeps me steady. Our bond is the compass that guides me through this chaos." In these moments, the brothers experienced the duality of war, the instinct for survival intertwined with the duty to protect, the fear interlaced with courage, the instinctive self-preservation tempered by loyalty. Lukas felt pride in his ability to act under pressure, yet guilt gnawed at him for the lives lost despite his obedience. Emil felt exhilaration at successfully leading the vulnerable to safety, yet despair at the helplessness imposed by forces beyond his control. The reality was inescapable. War spared no one, not soldiers, not civilians, not the innocent memories of childhood. Every sight, sound, and decision etched itself into their consciousness, reshaping the men they once were. In these crucibles of fear and responsibility, Lukas and Emil confronted the stark essence of combat, that courage alone was insufficient, that every choice carried weight, and that survival demanded a reconciliation with the moral and emotional costs of war. Through it all, letters remained the fragile tether to humanity, carrying not only information and reassurance, but the essence of their brotherhood, a reminder that even in the heart of destruction, they were still more than soldiers. They were brothers bound by memory, loyalty, and the hope of one day surviving together beyond the battlefield. As the dust settled and night fell over the ravaged towns and forests, Lukas and Emil were left to reckon with more than the physical exhaustion of battle. The brutality they had witnessed, the death of friends, the suffering of civilians, the randomness of survival etched itself into their consciousness, like scars invisible to the eye. Lukas's hands still trembled at the memory of Dieter's final moments. Emil's heart ached for the families he could not save. The battlefield had transformed them, revealing the fragility of life and the heavy cost of loyalty and courage. Their letters had become more than a connection between brothers. They were repositories of grief, fear, and moral reckoning. Lukas wrote, "Emil, I do not know if I am a soldier or a witness to tragedy. The orders I follow seem small against the suffering I see. Yet I write to you, for your words are the only light in this darkness." Emil's reply mirrored the same struggle Lukas. "Each life I could not protect weighs on me. Every choice feels impossible, yet thinking of you reminds me that we are more than this war. We endure not just for ourselves, but for those memories we carry." By the end of these first harrowing engagements, the brothers had come to a painful understanding. War was not a series of objectives to achieve or battles to win. It was a crucible testing every aspect of humanity: courage, compassion, loyalty, and resilience. The innocence of youth had been stripped away, replaced by a sobering awareness of mortality and moral complexity. As they prepared for the next phase of combat, the shadow of what was to come loomed larger. The battles ahead promised not only further physical danger, but also more profound emotional and ethical challenges. The letters, the memories, and the bond between brothers would serve as fragile anchors, guiding them through the trials yet to come, as the storm of war continued to rage around them. The battles had left marks far deeper than any wound visible to the eye. Lukas often woke in the dead of night, heart-pounding visions of Dieter's lifeless body flashing before him. The sound of distant artillery, the snap of a twig, even the sudden whistle of wind through the trees could trigger the memories of the first ambush. He felt a constant tension in his chest, a weight of guilt that orders he had followed led to lives lost. Each day the line between duty and conscience blurred, and he questioned whether survival and obedience were enough to justify the cost of so many lives. Emil carried his own burdens, equally heavy but different in shape. The faces of villagers he had tried to protect haunted him, especially the child he could not save. At night he would replay every choice, second-guessing every decision, wondering if a different path could have spared more lives. The independence and responsibility that came with resistance operations gave him freedom, but it also brought relentless moral pressure. Fear of failure, guilt, and the stark reality of mortality became inseparable companions on every mission. Letters became more than mere communication. They were lifelines, bridges to humanity, and outlets for confession. Lukas wrote in a shaky hand, "Emil, every command I follow feels heavier than the last. The faces of those who fell haunt me. I cling to our letters to the hope that my conscience can survive this chaos." Emil's reply was equally raw. "Lukas, the weight of every life I could not save presses on me. Each decision carries consequences I cannot undo. Yet thinking of you steadies me. You remind me who I am beyond this war." Through their correspondence, both brothers began to navigate the storm within themselves. The letters allowed them to articulate fears, confront grief, and maintain a thread of moral clarity. Even amidst the relentless demands of survival, these words preserved their humanity, offering solace that neither military discipline nor clandestine operations could provide. The psychological toll was undeniable: sleepless nights, constant anxiety, moments of rage and despair. Yet within this crucible, Lukas and Emil discovered resilience, empathy, and the first glimmers of understanding that war tested not only physical skill, but also moral and emotional endurance. The letters and memories of home became anchors, sustaining them as they faced the next stage of conflict, where every decision would weigh heavier and the consequences of inaction could be catastrophic. The war demanded choices Lukas had never imagined. After the first battles, he was assigned a mission to secure a strategic outpost near a small village. Orders were clear: hold the position at all costs. But as he approached the village, he saw civilians hiding among the ruins, children clutching dolls, elders trembling with fear. The weight of the command pressed on him. Follow orders or risk the lives of innocents by showing mercy. His training told him one thing, his conscience whispered another. Every step forward was a negotiation between duty and morality. Emil faced a parallel dilemma. A raid on a nearby town required him to provide reconnaissance while protecting civilians. One group of villagers was trapped between enemy patrols and advancing artillery. He had to decide quickly, abandon the mission to save them, or prioritize strategic objectives that could turn the tide for the resistance. Each heartbeat was a countdown, each choice potentially fatal. Emil's mind raced through scenarios weighing consequences in real time, understanding that every decision carried a moral and tactical cost. In the quiet intervals between action letters once again became their lifeline. Lukas wrote Emil, "Today I faced a choice I could not imagine before the war. The orders demand one thing, my heart another. I wonder if surviving with my conscience intact is possible. How do you choose between duty and humanity?" Emil responded, "Brother, the decisions are unbearable. I saved some, lost others, and feel the weight of every life on my shoulders. Yet I know that each choice we make defines us, not the war. Your courage and thoughtfulness guide me. Together our bond is a compass through the impossible." Through these missions, both brothers grew beyond the soldiers and fighters they had been. Lukas learned that leadership required more than obedience. It required judgment, compassion, and moral courage. Emil discovered the balance between decisive action and ethical responsibility, understanding that the protection of life often demanded ingenuity and sacrifice. These trials reshaped their identities. They were no longer simply participants in a war, they had become thinkers, leaders, and witnesses to the ethical complexities of human conflict. The letters sustained not only their bond, but also their humanity, reminding them that even in the face of chaos, they could make choices that preserved their integrity and honored the memory of those who had fallen. The months of relentless combat reshaped not only our bodies, but our minds and hearts. Lukas, once a boy content to follow orders without question, began to see the broader human cost of his actions. The rigid structure of military discipline, which had once provided comfort and clarity, now felt constraining and morally ambiguous. He began to weigh each order against his conscience, asking whether obedience could coexist with empathy. Each life lost under his watch became a lesson in accountability, teaching him that true courage encompassed more than precision, it demanded reflection, restraint, and compassion. Emil too matured beyond the enthusiastic youth who had first joined the resistance. He learned that heroism was not defined by boldness alone, but by thoughtful, calculated decisions. Every mission, every choice to save or to risk honed his ability to anticipate consequences, to balance the immediate safety of others against long-term objectives. He realized that leadership required patience, wisdom, and an acceptance that no decision could ever be perfect. Survival was not merely about staying alive, it was about preserving integrity and humanity amid chaos. The letters exchanged between us evolved in parallel with our growth. Lukas wrote Emil, "I see now that courage without conscience is hollow. I strive to act not only with skill, but with thought for the lives we touch. Each decision weighs on me, but I am learning what it means to be responsible, truly responsible for others." Emil responded, "Brother, I have come to understand that our choices define us more than our victories or losses. The lives we protect, the decisions we make under fire, they are the measure of who we are. Even amidst devastation, I carry the memory of home and our bond as guidance." Through these experiences, both of us began to perceive war not as a sequence of battles to be won, but as a crucible testing morality, resilience, and the essence of humanity. We learned to recognize the value of compassion, to weigh the cost of every action, and to find purpose beyond orders and ideology. The chaos of conflict became a teacher, imparting lessons about empathy, accountability, and the enduring strength of family and conscience. By the end of this period, Lukas and Emil were no longer the same young men who had left home. They were tempered by fire, guided by experience, and bound together by letters and memory. Each challenge, each loss, each moral dilemma had carved paths of understanding and growth, preparing them for the choices and sacrifices that the final stages of the war would demand. The war around us was not static. It evolved with a relentless pace, shaping every decision and movement we made. Reports filtered through our respective channels, sometimes delayed, often fragmented, but each carried a weighty significance. In Munich, Lukas learned of strategic shifts as the German High Command redirected divisions to reinforce critical fronts. Orders that had seemed straightforward became laden with complexity. Holding positions no longer guaranteed the safety of civilians, and tactical victories often came at unforeseen human cost. Every directive reminded Lukas that the larger machinery of war was indifferent to individual suffering, and yet he remained a vital cog within it. Emil, operating in the labyrinthine networks of the French resistance, tracked similar upheavals from the other side. Enemy troop movements altered supply lines, forcing sudden evacuations and improvisation. Local villages that had appeared safe one day were threatened the next. Every mission carried new variables, and each decision demanded instant adaptation. The ebb and flow of the conflict's strategic withdrawals, surprise offensives, and shifting front lines was a constant reminder that history was not abstract. It was a living, unpredictable force that dictated the rhythm of our lives. Letters became a shared archive of this unfolding history. Lukas wrote Emil, "The orders shift as quickly as the ground beneath us. I can see how each decision ripples outward, affecting lives I may never know. The war is a tide we are swept along with, and yet we must find our footing." Emil replied, "Brother, the landscape changes before we can even plan. Villages, forests, towns, they are no longer predictable. Our choices are forced upon us by the currents of history, yet we must act with care. Your words remind me that we are not alone in this chaos." Through these historical shifts, both of us learned the importance of perspective and foresight. Lukas began to see beyond immediate orders, contemplating the broader consequences of military campaigns. Emil developed a keen sense of tactical awareness, understanding how resistance actions fit within the larger theater of war. Both recognized that the human element, the choices, the morality, the courage of individuals was intertwined with historical forces, and that survival demanded both adaptation and conscience. The interplay between personal experience and the larger currents of history deepened our understanding of the war. Each strategy, each maneuver, each shift in command was more than a statistic or a report. It was a tangible force shaping our lives, our morality, and the fragile thread of connection that still bound us across enemy lines. Through it all, we learned that history's impact was immediate, personal, and inseparable from the choices we made, setting the stage for the difficult, ethical, and emotional trials yet to come. War was not endured alone. Lukas discovered this amid the disciplined ranks of his unit, where the bonds between soldiers became as vital as training or tactics. Shared hardship forged connections that transcended rank and background. He learned the subtle language of glances and gestures, the trust required to move as one under fire, and the unspoken understanding that each man's life depended on the other's. When a comrade fell, the grief was communal. When someone survived, relief and pride rippled silently through the ranks. These interactions shaped Lukas's perception of loyalty, honor, and the human cost of obedience. Emil experienced camaraderie of a different, more improvisational kind. In the resistance, alliances were fluid, often tested by secrecy and peril. Trust was fragile, yet indispensable. He learned to read expressions, anticipate intentions, and act decisively to protect both his team and the civilians under their care. Hyphenated lives, part operative, part protector, created a tapestry of dependence and respect. The shared successes, narrow escapes, and collective grief bound Emil to his comrades in a manner that mirrored but also contrasted with Lukas's experience. Letters to one another became a mirror reflecting these bonds. Lukas wrote Emil, "The men here are more than fellow soldiers. They are brothers forged in the same fire. We learn from each other, we protect each other, and yet I cannot forget the faces of those lost. Their memory drives me forward." Emil replied, "Brother, trust is everything here. One mistake, one lapse in judgment, and lives are gone. Yet, in these shared moments, I have found a family beyond family, a commitment to one another that strengthens every choice I make." Through these relationships, both brothers recognized that the human element of war was as powerful as strategy or training. Courage was not merely an individual trait, it was nurtured in the context of camaraderie, loyalty, and shared experience. They began to see that survival depended not only on skill and instinct, but also on empathy, communication, and the willingness to sacrifice for others. By understanding the dynamics of social bonds, Lukas and Emil grew in both leadership and moral awareness. The lessons learned from comradeship would carry forward, influencing every mission, every ethical decision, and every letter written to maintain the fragile bridge between them. Even amidst destruction and chaos, the humanity reflected in these interactions provided guidance, grounding them in a moral compass that the war continually challenged. Amid the relentless rhythm of war, letters became the most sacred lifeline between us. Lukas and I clung to these fragile sheets of paper as if they could shield us from the relentless tide of destruction. Each word carried more than news or updates. It carried hope, reassurance, and the shared memory of a life that seemed increasingly distant. In every line, we poured our fears, our triumphs, our grief, and our fleeting moments of solace. Lukas wrote of the burden of command in the faces of comrades' loss, revealing a vulnerability he seldom showed to anyone else. Emil, today I held the hand of a friend as life left him. The orders demand we move on, yet I cannot. Your words, even on paper, remind me of who I am beneath this uniform. Keep your courage, for it is my compass. I responded with equal honesty, recounting the civilians I had protected and those I had failed, the moral weight pressing on my shoulders with each decision. Brother, I guided families through fire and shadow, and still I am haunted by what I could not save. Your letters remind me of home, of laughter, and of what it means to remain human in a world that threatens to strip us of everything but survival. These letters were more than communication. They became a shared moral anchor. Through them, we examined our decisions, confronted the emotional toll of survival, and found the strength to continue. Each envelope smudged with ink or tear-stained was a repository of memory, a record of the lessons learned in the chaos of battle. They preserved not only the bond of brotherhood, but also the core of our humanity, empathy, conscience, and the capacity for hope. The letters also allowed us to reflect on the war itself, acknowledging its futility and cruelty, while clinging to the values we carried from home. They reminded us that even as battlefields consumed cities, lives, and innocence, we could assert control over our inner selves, making choices rooted in compassion and responsibility. By the end of these exchanges, it was clear that the correspondence had become a lifeline, extending far beyond ink and paper. It was a spiritual tether connecting us across miles and opposing sides, a reminder that even amid destruction and despair, the essence of our bond and the lessons of our upbringing could endure. In this fragile connection lay the seeds of resilience, hope, and the moral courage that would guide us through the trials yet to come. By this stage of the war, Lukas and I were no longer the same young men who had left home months or even years before. The relentless exposure to combat loss and moral ambiguity had reshaped our understanding of duty, courage, and humanity. Lukas had learned that obedience without conscience was hollow, and that true strength lay not merely in following orders, but in balancing responsibility with empathy. Emil had discovered that heroism required thoughtful judgment, patience, and the capacity to bear the weight of choices whose consequences could never be fully controlled. Our letters, now thick with ink and emotion, had become more than correspondence. They were our moral compass, a reflection of shared values, and a repository of memories that war threatened to erase. Through them, we sustained one another, maintained our humanity, and navigated the difficult terrain of survival while still holding on to the ideals instilled in us by our family and upbringing. We had grown to understand the true cost of conflict, not only in lives lost, but in the transformation of the soul, the erosion of innocence, and the necessity of resilience. Each decision, each mission, and each moment of fear or triumph contributed to our maturation, shaping us into men who could endure the trials ahead with courage tempered by conscience. As the war pressed on, the stakes grew ever higher. The choices that awaited us would demand not only skill and bravery, but the wisdom and moral clarity that had been forged through months of hardship. With our bond intact, preserved through letters and memory, we were prepared to face the final phases of the conflict. The lessons of Part 4, the sacrifices, the growth, and the unwavering connection between us would guide us as we moved toward the inevitable conclusion of this harrowing chapter of our lives. The war had entered its final chaotic days. Cities lay in ruins, streets littered with debris, smoke curling into a gray sky that seemed to mourn the destruction below. Lukas moved cautiously through the shattered town, every footstep stirring dust and echoes of lives that had been lost. His mission was clear: secure the remaining strategic positions and protect any civilians still trapped amid the rubble. But clarity and orders did little to quiet the turmoil within him. Each doorway, each collapsed building held unseen dangers and whispered memories of comrades who would never return. Emil, operating in a nearby village, faced similar peril. Civilians clung to whatever shelter remained, fear etched into their faces as artillery fire rumbled in the distance. He guided families through shattered streets and broken houses, balancing the urgency of survival with the constraints of limited resources and the constant threat of enemy patrols. Each decision was fraught with consequence, and the weight of responsibility bore down on him as heavily as the debris-strewn streets. The air was thick with smoke dust, and the acrid scent of destruction punctuated by the distant crack of gunfire and the sudden collapse of weakened buildings. Lukas paused for a moment, surveying the ruins, feeling both exhaustion and a profound sense of sorrow. He thought of Emil and the letters that had kept their bond alive, wondering if his brother was navigating the same chaos, if he too felt the same mixture of fear and determination. In these final days, every action was heightened by the knowledge that the end of the war was near, yet survival remained uncertain. Lukas and Emil carried not only their own lives, but the memories of all those who had fallen and the hope of preserving what little humanity remained. Each step, each choice was a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of connection amid devastation. The world around them had been consumed by war, yet the bond between brothers remained unbroken, guiding them through the final storm. The day the fighting finally ceased, the air hung heavy with smoke and silence. Lukas stood amid the ruins, heart pounding, scanning the devastated streets for any sign of life beyond the broken walls. Every familiar face he sought had long since vanished, carried away by the tide of war or lost to its relentless cruelty. When a familiar figure emerged from the shadows, Lukas's breath caught. It was Emil, tattered, exhausted, but alive. The sight of his brother brought a torrent of relief mingled with the weight of the months of separation, fear, and uncertainty. They embraced not with joy alone, but with the profound understanding of what they had endured. Their letters, once mere lines on paper, now felt like threads connecting them through years of terror, fear, and moral struggle. In that moment, the rubble around them seemed to recede, replaced by the fragile warmth of shared survival. Words were few. The silence spoke volumes of grief, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between them. Yet survival carried its own burdens. For every face they recognized, countless others were gone. Friends, comrades, and civilians whose lives had intersected with theirs had vanished, leaving scars invisible to the eye. Lukas felt the gnawing weight of loss, guilt, and exhaustion. Emil wrestled with the memories of those he had tried and failed to save. Even in reunion, the shadows of war lingered, haunting their steps and coloring their relief with sorrow. Whether in survival or in the shadow of loss, the brothers understood the profound cost of the conflict. The war had reshaped them, tested their morality, and defined the meaning of loyalty, courage, and humanity. The reunion was both a balm and a reminder of what they had preserved, and of all that they would carry in memory for the rest of their lives. Amid the silence and ruins, they knew that even in survival, the echoes of war would remain shaping their hearts, choices, and reflections for years to come. Even after the guns fell silent, the war continued to haunt us. Lukas awoke each night to flashes of the battlefield, faces of comrades lost, the screams of civilians, the echo of orders that had demanded obedience above empathy. Sleep was fractured, brief, and often haunted by nightmares that replayed moments of terror and moral conflict. His body bore the scars of battle bruises, burns, and the lingering aches of injuries sustained, but the mental wounds were far deeper, gnawing at his sense of self and leaving him questioning the purpose of his actions. Emil faced a parallel struggle. Though he had survived the raids and ambushes, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. The villagers he had guided to safety were forever imprinted in his memory, but so were those he could not save. Each choice made in desperation, each life lost despite his best efforts, lingered like a shadow over his mind. The freedom and ingenuity that had sustained him during the war now felt like a burden as the memories of near misses and moral compromises refused to fade. Reintegration into civilian life proved challenging. Streets were rebuilt, towns restored, yet the emotional landscape remained marred by trauma. Lukas and Emil relied on each other's presence and the enduring thread of their letters to navigate this new reality. Conversation and reflection became tools to process grief, guilt, and the ethical dilemmas that would remain long after the battles ended. Through this process, both came to understand that the true cost of war extended far beyond the battlefield. PTSD, physical injury, and moral scars would shape their lives indefinitely. Yet, amid the struggle, the lessons of empathy, resilience, and the enduring value of human connection offered a foundation upon which they could begin to rebuild. The war had changed them irrevocably, but it had also solidified the bond between brothers and underscored the imperative of preserving humanity even in the aftermath of unimaginable destruction.